Welcome to the BC History YouTube channel. I'm your host Bernard, and today's film is called Most Lovely Country. This is a quote from May of 1792 by Captain George Vancouver. The film was produced by Imperial Oil and directed by Lew Parry. It's an interesting take on how people viewed modernity and what was important in 1958, and you can see how much in just 2 generations everything has completely changed about how we view the world. Please enjoy.
The Portrait of a Queen in Memory of a Glorious Reign. Photographs of men and women who helped to pioneer a new frontier. Here, the mementos of earlier days and of a struggle in which man found the means to turn a wilderness into a prosperous province. Here are symbols of progress, collected and preserved by a dedicated man in Vancouver City archives, so that British Columbia's youth and future generations might have a permanent link with the past.
Major Matthews, I brought you the file on Texada Island.
That report is authentic. Thank you, Mrs. Gibbs.
Thank you, Major.
Sir, are you Major Matthews, the archivist?
I am. What can I do for you?
Well, sir, we want to know, what's that red thing over there?
Oh, that? Oh, that was used to measure out the gasoline in British Columbia's first service station. It was the first one in Canada. That was back about 1907.
Were you here then, sir?
I was. I sold gasoline out of this same tank 50 years ago.
50 years. Gee.
Yes, a half a century. That was actually the beginning of the oil business in this province, which is a very important industry today.
I suppose it is, sir.
Yes. What would our lives be without it? Half the power we use every day comes from petroleum.
You mean gasoline engines, sir?
Yes. Gasoline engines, diesel engines, they played a big part in the development of this country. They've helped to make it a wonderful place in which to live. I sometimes wonder, what would Captain George Vancouver think of it if he were alive today?
What would George Vancouver think of British Columbia today? In 1792, he had sailed halfway around the world to explore this unknown shore, crossed uncharted oceans, skirted treacherous shorelines. He had come by order of his king to probe the secrets of its rugged coast, to survey its channels, and to establish the sovereignty of these islands, and this land that one day would come to be known as British Columbia. From the deck of his sloop Discovery, he saw beyond a wilderness of rugged mountains and uncharted waters. His visions were recorded in his ship's journal. In May of 1792, he wrote,
"To describe the beauties of this region will on some future occasion be a very grateful task to the pen of a skillful panegyrist. The serenity of the climate, the innumerable pleasing landscapes, and the abundant fertility that unassisted nature puts forth require only to be enriched by the industry of man to render it the most lovely country that can be imagined, whilst the labor of the inhabitants will be amply rewarded in the bounties which nature seems ready to bestow on cultivation."
Beyond the lush growth of fir and cedar, George Vancouver found a people with a rich culture who long since had made peace with this wild country. The thick forests gave them cedar for their long houses and bark sinews to be woven into clothing. wood for their dugout canoes. Salmon in the sea and the rivers fed them. They required only primitive tools to take a livelihood from the wilderness, for their needs were simple. But this wilderness was so bountiful that it was only a matter of time before others would come to share it. First came the fur trader. Then, quite suddenly, the wealth that lay hidden in the gravel of inland rivers drew people from the ends of the earth. In the gravel was gold. Some took fortunes from their gold pans, while many others were to fail. But some who did not find gold stayed on to settle on the frontier land, theirs for the breaking, and there was shelter and security when the day's work was done. Roads were pushed into the hinterland, where more land waited to be cultivated. Land to graze their cattle, farmland, where slowly, with hard work, they could build a future for themselves and their children. The ox train and the stagecoach were the only contact between scattered settlements in this immense land. But gradually, the lonely homes grew into communities. Security grew too, as the land began to give up its riches. Progress and development were steady but slow. For this was the horse and buggy era. Life was leisurely, but a new era, a new discovery waited round the turn of the century that would change all this. The horseless carriage, a machine with an internal combustion engine under the hood. Gasoline, the new form of energy, as yet was not always on hand when needed. At first, the horseless carriage was little more than a plaything, frequently the butt of jokes. But this was serious business to the attendants of Canada's first gas station in the young city of Vancouver. These new machines may have been unpredictable at first, but they brought a new sound to British Columbia. This was the symbol of events to come, of the way power and machines would speed development of the West, help lighten physical tasks, and make life easier with leisure to enjoy it. Today, the symbol has become a dynamic reality, with motors, wheels, and crowds on the move. Here, but a few years ago, a wilderness of rock and forest, a few Indian trails. Now broad thoroughfares, paved roads, a cavalcade of wheels. Heavy loads, huge trucks, and fast transport. In the skies, another transportation network by aircraft, modern engineering miracle. Aircraft whose speed and flexibility brings the rest of Canada closer and unites the far corners of the province. The plane brings men and materials to develop resources and expand distant communities. The growth of cities, towns, villages has been speeded by power, steam power, electric power, the power of petroleum, the same energies which have helped British Columbians to live with their mountains. 200,000 square miles of granite, once a barrier, now a potential resource. The engineer, the prospector, modern pioneers have turned to the power of vertical flight to probe for their secrets. Mountaintops echo to the power of the rock drill. Trucks, shovels, dozers, air drills. These are the tools of the men who move mountains. Once an unbelievable task, now a day-to-day job. British Columbians have learned to use their mountains. This rock pile, once part of a mountain, has become a dam to store precious runoff from mountain glaciers. A high-altitude lake, harnessed to provide water for turbine generators that in turn provide electric power for communities hundreds of miles away. Canyons that dismayed early explorers have been gouged for modern roadbeds, railways, highways, to link communities and join this industrious province with the rest of Canada, with the United States and Alaska. The history of bush flying is one of the great romances of the West. Pilots log millions of air miles each year, speeding men and supplies into remote areas. This is the taxi service for the construction worker, the miner, and the lumberman. Forests cover 2/5 of the province. Early explorers thought of trees only as masts for their ships. Settlers regarded them as obstacles to be cleared before crops could be planted. None could foresee that modern power would turn these trees into British Columbia's greatest industry. The first sawmills were established along the coast and the Fraser River more than a century ago. And as the country developed, so too did its forest industries, both on Vancouver Island and the mainland. Each year, more than 5 billion feet of timber are cut. Timber to become lumber and plywood and shingles. Timber to become pulp and paper, newsprint. Here are some of the largest pulp and paper mills in the world. Some of the largest sawmills producing forest products that utilize a tree down to the last splinter. In the mines, the drills go deep. Copper, lead, zinc, coal and iron, gold and silver, uranium. These are the raw materials of vigorous mining communities like New Denver, Caslow, Kimberley, Rossland, and at Trail, the largest base metal smelter in the British Commonwealth. This is another industry in which science and power team up with man's ingenuity to use the raw materials of hard rock land. Along the granite shoreline, fish boats tell another story. The fish are running. Seiners and packers strain under full power to reach the fishing grounds first, each crew eager for its share of the catch. Salmon and cod, herring, halibut. 6 million tons are caught every year. About 40% of all fish caught in Canadian waters. The prize catch of BC fishermen is salmon, and in season the coastal waters swarm with seiners, trollers, packers. Fishing fleets range from the Straits of Juan de Fuca and Vancouver Island to Prince Rupert near the Alaska boundary. Salmon has a particular place in history. The Indians, explorers, early pioneers, smoked and dried it as winter fare. Salmon was first canned along the Fraser River in 1870, and because of its excellent flavor, it became a product in great demand by people the world over. Modern canneries pack over 2 million cases, 96 million pounds every year. The abundance of nature needs only to be assisted by the industry of man. Inland from the abundant sea are the farmlands and fertile valleys. The Okanagan Valley was once a desert of cactus and sagebrush until man pumped water from the lakes and started orchards, where now apricots, apples, and peaches grow in abundance. of tree crops created from the dust, with power to cultivate it, harvest it, and speed its fruits, orchard fresh, on their way to market. Beyond the coastal mountains lie 42,000 square miles of grassland, the caribou, the Nicola, the Chilcotin, names that conjure up pictures of the Old West. Cattlemen drove the first breeding herds into these valleys in 1858. Many gold rush miners gave up their claims to become cattlemen, and some founded ranches. Today, Douglas Lake, the Gang, the Chilco, Diamond S, and Lazy U are among others, famous from Chicago to Rio. North of the Caribou, and just short of the Arctic tundra. Here, wheat kings of the Peace River found resource in the fertility of the soil. They produce a prize hard wheat known to growers around the world. Amid the high-yielding farms in this fabulous area, a new sound has joined that of the mower and the reaper. In recent years, after many disappointments, oil men have found and proven up large reserves of petroleum and natural gas in Alberta and northeastern British Columbia. And every day the search goes on in the hope of adding new discoveries to help meet the steadily increasing demand for oil. It takes great power to drill for petroleum. Petroleum itself drives the drills deep into the earth to search for more petroleum. Here will be the answer whether a well is a success or failure. Tank cars and tank trucks carry bunker and diesel fuels, gasolines and asphalt from BC refineries to plants throughout the province, while pipelines bring crude for processing from Western Canadian fields. The Ioko refinery, one of the largest in Western Canada, has been processing crude oil since 1915. In pioneer times, petroleum products shipped from Winnipeg, kerosene, axle grease, and lubricants were distributed by ox cart and riverboat. Today, British Columbia refineries process more than 750 million gallons of crude a year. British Columbians use more petroleum than most other Canadians. While the search for oil continues, researchers are at work making new and better products. Engineers are continually building new refinery units. New developments in engine design and in industry require higher compression fuels, new lubricants, and improved petroleum products of many kinds. For this reason, refinery structures present an ever-expanding pattern against the Pacific skyline. With abundant raw materials, adequate power, and space for expansion, BC industry is able to produce for export. Seaports have grown along the inlets first charted by Captain George Vancouver. And in these harbors, ships of many nations conduct a healthy exchange of imports for exports. Out go lumber, plywood, shingles, several billion board feet a year. Salmon from the canneries. From the wharves of pulp and paper mills along the coastline, and and into the hold goes newsprint and paper pulp. Over 1 million tons a year. Wheat from Grand Prairie and Fort St. John, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, is exported from British Columbia's ice-free harbors all the year round. George Vancouver wrote of innumerable pleasing landscapes, and how he would appreciate the landscapes of today, rugged fir and delicate blossoms thriving together, gracing homes and an architecture that reflects the spacious freedom of living in the West. Modern energy and machines have brought more leisure to enjoy this freedom. Leisure time to enjoy the garden as an outdoor living room where nature is the decorator, changing color schemes as season follows season. Nearly everyone, young and old alike, is sports conscious. For at least 4 months of the year, the beaches and parks are everybody's playground. So are the coastal waters with their myriads of island resorts and inland waterways. A West Coast Derby is not a horse race. It means salmon, with fun for the whole family. And here, going fishing is something everyone can do. Maybe she'll catch a tyee, 50 pounds or more. Maybe only a trout, or somebody else's tackle. But it's all good fun. Everybody's fun. And so is owning a boat. If you can't afford a yacht, you can build a plywood dinghy in the basement. Or you may win a boat, if luck is with you. All you have to do is catch the biggest salmon, and they're all big to start with. The freshness of nature, the adventurous spirit of this country, also permeates its culture, lends vigor to education, greater importance to its university as a living force in the community. Here, youth, mindful of its heritage, is eager to project its traditions in art, music, and literature strongly forward into the future. This is a province which gives to its people the opportunity to use their heritage. They have the resources to build, the power to move, and the leisure to enjoy British Columbia. What would Captain Vancouver think if he were alive today? In the wilderness he explored in 1792, he'd find living and playing a happy people. He couldn't have imagined the speed of development in this age of power, couldn't have realized the resources of the land he first charted on world maps. But some clairvoyant glimpse into the future did inspire him to write in his ship's journal in 1792 a forecast of things to come.
The serenity of the climate, the innumerable pleasing landscapes, and the abundant fertility that unassisted nature puts forth require only to be enriched by the industry of man to render it the most lovely country that can be imagined, whilst the labor of the inhabitants will be amply rewarded in the bounties which nature seems ready to bestow on cultivation.